At this time, I'd like to call into session the Northborough-Southborough Regional School Committee Special Open Meeting of Friday, July 31st, 2020 at 8:03 a.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Northborough-Southborough Regional School Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the district website. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to listen or watch the meeting may do so in the following manner, and the URL is listed on the agenda. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the district website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. And there on the posting is a way to register in advance for this webinar. Since we've done convening, I would now like to entertain a motion to go into executive session. And who makes the motion, if they could please read the motion into record.
I could. So I move that we move to executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining due to the chair's determination that a discussion regarding this matter in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the position of the committee with intent to return to open meeting.
Okay, and so
Second.
And second by Paul Desmond. And this is a roll call. Karen Ayers.
Yes.
Paul Bucca,
Yes.
Paul Desmond,
Yes.
Kathy Key,
Yes.
Kathy Pelechko,
Yes.
Dan Kalenda is absent. Chris Coven.
Yes.
Sean O'Shea,
Yes.
Joan Frank, yes. And am I missing anybody?
Kathleen.
Kathleen
That's
Highland.
Kathleen. Yes.
Kathleen Highland. Okay, anyone else that I missed? Okay, so at this time, we will be going into executive session. We anticipate for our audience members that this may be 60 minutes, and then we will come back into open session.
And I will provide the audience with an update once we get close to let them know that we'll be restarting the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And just the other comment is that all conversations could be heard by the attendees
Okay.
in the webinar. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very well. For those panelists that are still here, just let you know that all of the people that are in the audience can hear any discussion that occurs. So what we did the other night was that everyone muted themselves and turned off their video.
9:46 a.m. I'd like to reconvene the open session. I'd like to thank those audience members that have been with us and stayed with us as we did our executive session. The next item that we have on our agenda is the OPED investment strategy. And just so members know, we will need a motion and we need to vote this at the end of the presentation. Mr. Martineau?
So just a bit of background before I turn it over to Becky Pellegrino to explain further. So as you know, we've been working on setting up other post-employment benefit trusts and coming up with a funding strategy to fund our liability around employment benefits. So we worked very closely throughout last year, and we successfully opened a PARS trust, which Becky can speak to. And at this point, the committee needs to vote an investment strategy. And I'll turn it over to Becky to explain some of the choices and selections.
Sure. So Greg had provided, as part of your school committee packets, documentation that provided an outline of each investment strategy's objectives and allocations. There are basically 4 types of strategies that we can employ. The first is a fixed income, the second, conservative portfolio, the third is a balanced portfolio, and then finally a growth portfolio. And I'll just give you a little bit of an overview on each of those strategies. So with a fixed income, 97% of that account would be bonds, with a small amount in cash and then an other category. For this investment, the rates of return were 7.9% for 2019, 3.19% for the past 5 years, and then 3.85% for the past 10 years. The next category, which is the conservative portfolio, is a 55% bond split and a 42% equity split. And you'll notice in the fixed, there was no equity included in that investment strategy. The rates of return for the conservative portfolio were 16.86% for 1 year for 2019, 5.82% for the past 5 years, and then 7.13% for the past 10 years. The next category is the balanced portfolio, and you can see the bonds are kind of moving down, where it's 38% bonds and then 60% equity, with the remaining amounts in cash and other. The rates of return for 1 year was 20.38%, 6.99 for the past 5 years, and 8.4 for the past 10 years. And then lastly, growth portfolio, it's now 22% bonds and 76% equity, with the remaining amount in cash and other. And the rates for the 1 year was 23.56%, 8.06 for the past 5 years, and 9.54% for the past 10 years. In speaking with Kate Canny from PARS, she did indicate that most districts elect the balanced fund strategy. We also reached out to David Eisenthal, our financial advisor at Unibank, and because he is not licensed in investments, he is not able to provide an opinion to us on these funds. In looking at these, they're all very similar in terms of the, except for the fixed income, in terms of the rates of return. It really is a matter of what the school committee's, I guess, risk aversion may be. Obviously, this is all subject to market turns, and you could see that in those years, I think there were 2 years, I want to say it was 2018, and then into 2012, where there were some downturns. Many of them were very close to breaking even or a slight loss in those years. So it would be, my recommendation that we also elect the balanced portfolio. I think it gives us a nice mix. It's not too aggressive, but yet it is also aggressive enough where it would provide rates of return on an investment that really we're in for the long haul. It's not something that we need in the short term. And Sean, I did see your question. I do not have a presentation for this, but I'm referencing the materials that were provided to the committee. These numbers were included in that.
Sorry. Didn't have the.
Sorry.
Thanks, Becky. Are there questions from committee members to Greg or to Becky? Because seeing that there aren't any questions,
Can I ask one question?
sure, Kathy.
How long are we committing to this? Are we committing to this for a certain amount of years, or can it change year to year?
Great point, and I neglected to bring that up. We can make a change at any point in time. So if we decide that we want to maybe move to the fixed income, once we notify them, we can make that change.
Okay, thank you.
And if
Any
I
other?
could,
Yes, Paul Bucker.
and I assume, Becky, as it gets bigger, we hope it gets bigger, that at some point in time, we could even kind of unbundle it and do some percent with an aggressive or a balanced strategy and some other percent with a more conservative strategy. I would guess that the mutual fund company would allow us to do that. I think the money's too small now to bother, but at some point in the future, I think maybe that should be an option for us, yes?
I will check with Kate on that. It's my understanding we have to select one of the four, but I will check if that's an option down the road.
Through the chair, it'd
Sure.
be my recommendation that annually we review the investment strategy of this OPEB fund, just as a matter of practice and protocol.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Greg, do we have the wording of a motion, or would you like one of the members just to compose it?
If one of the members could compose it, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
I move that we instruct our OPEB mutual fund provider to follow a balanced portfolio strategy as recommended by Rebecca Pellegrino.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Was that Karen? I heard two people. Okay, so motion is made by Paul Bucka, seconded by Karen Ayers. Any other further discussion? Okay, this will be a roll call to accept the motion. Karen Ayers,
Yes.
Paul Bucka,
Yes.
Chris Covino,
Yes.
Paul Desmond,
Yes.
Kathleen Highland,
Yes.
Kathy Key,
Yes.
Sean O'Shea,
Yes.
Kathleen Palachko,
Yes.
and Joan Frank, yes. Okay, the next item that Becky, thank you very much for all your knowledge on this and your expertise. We really appreciate it. And as Greg said, we will annually review this. Going to the next item we have is reopening plan, and I'll turn it over to Superintendent Martineau.
So thank you. Just provide some context around our reopening plans and the work that we've been doing as a district to think about what the fall, school year will look like. First, I just want to share that this planning has began at the close of the 1920 academic year. We have been planning rigorously throughout the past 6 to 7 weeks. It's been a very collaborative process, and we've tried to include as many stakeholders in terms of developing the plans. The stakeholders have included members from the district leadership team, which includes educators, district leaders. It's about a 30-member team. We have a reopening advisory panel, which consists of educators, administrators, and they've been advising based on plans that we put forward around reactions and what changes need to be made and so forth. We've met probably 5 or 6 times with the reopening advisory panel since it was established in June. We've also been working very closely with our health and safety experts. We're very fortunate to live in 2 communities where there are exceptional parents, but also exceptional parents who have careers in the medical fields who are willing to volunteer their time to help us make some decisions. So we have Dr. Medina, who is our district physician, has been a key person in the work. We have Dr. Cirinella, who's an epidemiologist, who's been volunteering her time to help us understand the medical research. We have Dr. Costigan, who is an ER doctor at Marlborough Hospital, who's been, again, helping us with decisions. And we've been working very closely with the 2 towns' boards of health around making decisions. And lastly, we are fortunate to have a Northborough parent who is an engineer with an expertise in air quality and evaluating HVAC systems, and he does this around the country. And as a result, he's volunteered his time and conducted an air quality assessment of all 10 of our schools across the 3 districts. But for this committee, he has done that assessment at Algonquin as well. Principals have worked with school-based planning teams. Principal Bevan has established a think tank, which has been, he's been keeping informed and getting feedback and input from the think tank. We've been working closely with our associations. So again, the longstanding partnership that we've had with ARDA around making great decisions on the best interests of our students. And lastly, the school committee has been essential in this reopening plan and families. And primarily our families has been input has been through surveys, working with NSPAC and some of our community organizations. So again, it's been I think we've tried to include as many stakeholders in the process as possible, and that we'll continue to endeavor to do that as we move forward to the beginning of the year. So just in terms of process, I spoke briefly about it began in June. We've been working around the clock developing this plan. Just in terms of some timelines, on July 15th, the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education outlined a 2-step reopening process for all public schools to follow. And actually today we are required to submit a preliminary reopening plan summary to DESE, which does not commit us to anything, but just gives the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education some direction on where districts across the Commonwealth are headed and what they're thinking. And then by August 10th, we're required to submit a comprehensive plan to the DESE for their final approval. And I think we are in a good place in terms of our district's plan, and we probably could submit a plan today, a comprehensive plan today to the department if we were required to. But we have some time for more stakeholder feedback and input. So what's driving some of the planning that we've been doing? Really, DESE has been providing guidance to all districts across the Commonwealth, and there's been no shortage of guidance. I just want to point out some dates in this list. The first date is really around, fall reopening transportation guidance was released July 22nd, which was last week. Fall remote learning guidance was released last Friday. Guidance for courses with additional safety requirements, again, last Friday. So we are moving as quickly as we can, but not moving at a pace where we're not incorporating the guidance into our reopening plans. And I just, lastly, there's a lot of concern in the community about reopening schools, and from our families to our educators. And I just want to acknowledge the concern. This is a pandemic. It is concerning. And we understand that concern, and we are trying to make data-driven, informed decisions around our plans. But the pandemic is rapidly evolving, and what exists today in terms of metrics is probably going to look very different in a week and 2 weeks. We monitor this changing landscape regularly, almost on a daily basis. Mary Ellen Duggan keeps her ear to the ground in terms of what's happening. And again, our work is not to decide right now on what's the reopening model, but ensuring that we have a continuum of models that are integrated and are seamless, and that we'll be able to move in and out of the models depending on what the health metrics are telling us, without having students lose time on learning, or without having the district to create whole new plans and parents to learn whole new routines. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie to talk about kind of our strategy and the big picture for the committee. And Stephanie.
Sure, thank you. So we wanted to first just present a graphic to try and capture the many strands of planning that are happening simultaneously. And if you look at the top, you can see in the center that we have the district reopening plans, which we're presenting to you today. And we have been interacting back and forth, both with the DESE guidance, which Greg just spoke about, and also the medical team and our air quality engineer, who he also spoke about, so that as we continue with our plans, we are always going back and forth with those resources to make sure that we are aligned and consistent, and reaching the highest quality or exceeding those expectations. As we have been defining at a district level our plans, we have the school-based teams working simultaneously, and again, the interaction back and forth from school to district, to be able to create more detailed plans about what that looks like in each school. So for Algonquin, we at a district level, and then they at a school level, have been working on 4 different models, which I will be speaking about in more depth: an in-person model, a hybrid model, a full remote model, and a standalone remote model. As we work on each of those models, which each have different needs and constraints and specifics, there are certain threads that cut across them all. And so the 3 arrows at the bottom represent 3 major threads that cut across all of them. There are other things, obviously, that do. One of them is that for whatever model we're in, we're planning for service delivery models and student support systems so that we meet the needs of the full range of learners in any of these situations. The second arrow, occasional remote, is referring to the fact that we need to be aware and planning ahead for the fact that there will be some students and staff, if we are in a hybrid or an in-person model, who may need to quarantine at some point, or for other reasons be out for, whether they're sick or they're just quarantining, be out for extended periods of time. So we are keeping that as something we're planning for. And additionally and importantly, professional development is a thread that we are planning for across all 4 models. Thinking about our educators throughout the system and what supports not only at the beginning of the year, but throughout this year need in terms of technology, curriculum, pedagogy, anti-racism education, social emotional learning, and opportunities for collaborative planning. We know from the spring, and we heard from educators, that some of their greatest successes or sense of efficacy around remote learning was the product of collaboration among educators. So creating the opportunities and the space for that to happen is important. And I just want to add that as we talk about professional development across all of these models, we're also talking about education and supports for families, regardless of which model we're in, so that our Algonquin families have the support they need to understand all of the different technologies and pedagogies and things that are being enacted. So hopefully that just gives you a big picture view of the sort of threads of planning, particularly focused on teaching and learning. There's a whole nother picture that we're going to talk about now related to the health and safety side of things.
So just in terms of the guiding principles for our reopening plans, we have 7 guiding principles, and I won't read through each one, but I will share that the first priority is the most important, and that is to prioritize the physical, social, and emotional well-being of the students, families, faculty, and staff. Obviously, the health and wellness and safety of our students, faculty, and staff is essential. So at this point in time, I'm going to have Mary Ellen Duggan, our health and wellness coordinator, share information about the guide in terms of health, safety, and well-being. And Mary Ellen, would you like me to open up the actual guide?
That would be great. Yes,
Okay.
please. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for your presentation and education.
We're learning something new every day, all of us.
That's for sure.
I think it's in the draft reopening plans, Greg. If you want to go there, we can just click on that tab.
Just hang on one second. I apologize. I had the tab open and I closed it by accident.
Not sure if the PDF is the right one. The PDF might not have the right links.
So I think that the purpose of sharing the guide is that this is a draft reopening guide, and we are working on finalizing this in terms of the draft. But I think it's important for the community to see the level of detail that is included in this this plan.
Okay, so our draft reopening guidelines, obviously health and safety are a priority for everybody involved throughout this whole pandemic. And it's our greatest priority when we talk about reopening schools. We, as you've all heard, we're all in this together. So the things that we've been doing in the community to decrease our metrics and bring our positivity rate down are the same things we're going to be doing in the schools. And we need to remember that we are all in this together, and these things that we have to do are what's going to promote the health and safety of everybody. So as we go through that, there are going to be guidelines for everything. Everything, when we think about returning to school, everything's going to be new. So there are going to be all kinds of guidelines about wearing masks, about hand hygiene, about entering buildings and exiting buildings, about having mask breaks, about having meetings at school. So we are in the process. Some are under construction, but there are a lot of guidelines that have already been created. And those will be sent out with the reopening plans that are distributed later this week. You can keep going down. So through this, we have consulted, as Mr. Martineau said, with our medical team of experts, along with the air quality engineer, and they have been an invaluable resource to all of us throughout this. When it comes to masks and face coverings, we have the order in our Commonwealth that everybody must wear a mask or face covering in a public place. And that is still going to be doing it. The guidelines that came out from DESE were for grades 2 and above, but we as the district are recommending that everybody wear a mask, pre-K through 12 be recommended to wear a mask. There are protocols for mask wearing, and there are protocols for students and protocols for staff. We will be sending out educational material. Last week was a general overview. This week will be more specifically on masks, and there'll be resources available for people to get used to wearing masks. So a lot of us have never worn masks for an extended period of time. So some of the general guidelines will be that all students and adults are required to wear a mask or face covering that covers their nose and mouth at school and on the bus. Exceptions to mask or face covering requirements will be made on an individual basis. Mask breaks will occur throughout the day. That when the masks are off for mask breaks, that the 6 foot of distance must be maintained. And ideally, mask breaks would happen outside, or if they're inside, this individuals are seated and the windows are open. People will have lots of education that goes on about masks, about wearing masks, putting masks on, taking masks off, and then the guidelines about how many should be sent to school each day with the students. We will be providing masks for staff. It comes from the recommendation of the medical team because there have been studies done about the transmission of COVID-19 with surgical masks on, and the transmission rate has been negligible. So we will be providing surgical masks for all employees to wear. We also have face shields for all employees, and the face shield would come into use if the students could not wear masks. The staff would wear a mask and a face shield because that will protect others from you and protect you from others. There are guidelines about when you're doing an educational session where students might need to view your mouth for the lesson and be able to see your face, if you are greater than 6 feet apart, your mask can be removed and the face shield can be worn solely until the lesson is done and then the mask replaced. The other thing that we have to remember is physical distancing, which is one of the most important parts about keeping ourselves safe, no matter where we are, the masks, the physical distancing, and the hand hygiene. That's our big trifecta there to keep yourself safe from COVID-19, no matter what situation you're in. But we are recommending the 6-foot distance between individuals be maintained at all times. Desks and tables will be facing in the same direction in classrooms. All non-essential furniture will be removed from learning spaces so that we can maximize the space for students and faculty and staff to maintain that 6-foot distance. When distancing is not possible for nursing staff or other faculty and staff that are supporting students that have a higher need, they will have additional safety precautions and will be instructed in the appropriate PPE needed for those situations. And hallways will be tried to be one directional depending on the width of the hallway. It would depend on if it could be 2 directional or not. We're all used to that going into a grocery store. The aisles are all one way. So our hallways and stairways will be directional, and there will be signage to let people know which that is. Screening is another important part about mitigating COVID-19. So on a daily basis, employees and families will be required to complete a screening checklist. This will be done on the honor system. We have to realize that we are all in a pandemic. This is our life, and we need to abide by the guidelines that are set before us. And one of these guidelines is that a daily checklist will need to be completed. The screening checklist is the same for students and for staff. It includes a symptom checklist. So it includes all the symptoms of COVID-19 you would go through. If you had any of those symptoms, you entered yes to a symptom, you would need to contact the school nurse, who would then give you guidance as to what needed to be done to be able to return to school. The second section is about being a close contact, and that's being close contact, which means within 6 feet of someone for greater than 10 to 15 minutes. For that extended amount of time, you would be considered a close contact of someone with a positive case of COVID-19. So if you answered yes to that in the past 14 days, you would need to contact your school nurse and they would advise you. The third part of the checklist is about travel. So as you know, starting tomorrow, August 1st, Massachusetts is the travel ban order. And we have had a travel advisory, but now the Commonwealth has the travel ban order that is starting August 1st. So we will follow the same guidelines as the Commonwealth. And if you travel outside the lower risk states, you would need to quarantine for 14 days upon return to Massachusetts. So those are what's included in the checklist, and it's the basic guidelines to come back to school would be what we would follow from the CDC, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and our local Board of Health would be determining when people could return to school if they were considered a close contact or if they were considered, if they had COVID-19, what those guidelines would be. And those are included in the return to school guidelines. If a student or employee is COVID-19, they would need to they would be contacted by their local Board of Health, but they would also need to contact the school so that we could do contact tracing or case tracing depending on their close contacts in the past 48 hours from the time they became symptomatic. We have been working closely with our local Board of Health agents and nurses, and we would continue to do that throughout the school year and be advised by them, as well as our medical experts. Hand washing. So we have our little suite there of health and safety things, which are the masks, the physical distancing screening, and hand hygiene. Hand washing has always been and will always be the #1 way we can keep ourselves healthy. So proper hand washing, I should clarify that, proper hand washing. So when we return to school, hand washing and hand sanitizing will be a focus, and it needs to be a focus because it is the way that we keep ourselves, the #1 way that we keep ourselves healthy. So the guidelines will be that upon entry into the building and exiting a building or classroom, you need to sanitize your hands before and after meals, after bathroom, after coughing or sneezing, before removing your face covering or mask, and after you replace it, and then when you're leaving the building, you would sanitize your hand upon leaving the building. If hand washing is not available, there will be hand sanitizer in each classroom, and it will meet the guidelines put forth by the Department of Public Health and the CDC about the percentage of alcohol that needs to be in that hand sanitizer. So there will be wall units as well as individual hand sanitizing stations in each classroom. Cohorting and minimizing the number of students who would potentially be affected from each other. So what will happen is that we will recommend that people have assigned seating in their classrooms so that if we needed to do contact tracing, we would know who the closest people to the positive case would be by their assigned seatings, whether they be assigned seatings on the bus, in the classroom, and in the lunchroom. So that would be as is feasible throughout the day. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, we have ordered and procured a lot of PPE already by the Department of Education's recommendations. We were supposed to have PPE available to cover the first 12 weeks of entry into school, and they gave us guidelines to follow, and we have met those and exceeded them. So these are a list of things we have. We have gloves, we have N95 masks for the healthcare professionals. We have surgical masks, adult size and pediatric size. We have fabric face coverings. Also, we have face shields, eye goggles, plexiglass barriers where they're needed, lab coats for the nursing staff and other educational staff that might need them, disposable gowns for staff that would need them, pulse oximeters, thermometers, the no-touch thermometers, hand sanitizer dispensers, hand sanitizer refills, sanitizing wipes, the electrostatic sprayers for disinfecting, and Keith can get into that, and cleaning supplies, as Keith can attest to. It's really important that if people are not feeling well, that they remain home. I know that's a different mindset, that some of us would come to work and some of us do go to work when pushed through when we're not 100%. But in a pandemic, we can't do that. So if you're symptomatic, there are guidelines that will be followed, and you will need to follow those guidelines that are outlined in the guidelines above about coming to work and checking your symptoms and doing the daily checklist. So the nurse would need to be notified, and then they would be able to advise you as what would need to be done. When we're responding to student and employee illness, things will be a little bit, look a little bit different at school. It won't be, the nurse's office will not just be a place where people can stop by. It will be that the nurse needs to be notified, because there will be a part to the health offices that are for medical procedures or medications or to treat injuries, and there will be a separate space for illnesses. So we need to keep those two spaces separate, and so that will be, they would need to be notified prior to people coming to the health office, so we would know where we needed to be and what PPE we might need to put on. We would, if someone was symptomatic, had any symptoms of COVID-19, it would be in our medical waiting room or isolation room. Those terms are used interchangeably, as you may have heard recently. And we would follow the guidelines for return to school, notifying those that needed to be notified. And that would be it. We are asking parents to provide 3 to 4 emergency contacts that would be able to pick up their child within 30 minutes of notification that they need to be dismissed from school. These areas that the medical waiting room and the nurse's room will be cleaned and disinfected, and there are protocols for that also. In a pandemic, we are required to notify our local Board of Health if we are aware of a person who tests positive for COVID-19, or if we will work closely with them to determine who the close contacts are for case tracing or contact tracing. We will not be allowing visitors at this time to the building. There will be a limited, restricted visitation, I should say, because if we have contracted laborers that need to come in to do electrical work or plumbing work, they will come in. If those visitors do come into the building, they will need to follow our checklist guidelines prior to. So for example, we had the AED inspections done the other day, and I sent our checklist to that company. They had to confirm to me verbally that their answer was no to all the answers. And then we met and I told them they had to wear a mask, we had to remain 6 feet apart, and all of those other safety measures.
And that is also true for the contractors that have come in the building as well, Mary Ellen, for any type of building work.
So there will be guidelines about meetings and guidelines about visitors, and those will be outlined by each school. Some things for each school will be specific for that school, but there will be a general guideline from the district for all of these processes.
So in terms of process of this presentation, we're going to go through each section of the reopening guide. And at the end of each section, we'll ask if the committee members have any questions. So through the chair at this time, if you want to entertain questions around this section.
Sure. Any questions for Mary Ellen Duggan and the health, safety, and well-being section of the reopening plan?
I have a question.
Kathleen?
So, and I'm not sure it's Mary Ellen, but it will definitely be handled. I assume it'll be handled in the in this document. But so we're going to have issues with the little kids about just not following mask instructions, and we're going to have issues with the bigger kids about just not being compliant. Where are we going to address mask discipline if kids don't want to, or they're messing around and pulling off, you know, each other's masks and stuff like that? Where is that handled?
I think that's for Greg.
So that Principal Bevan is with us today. So I believe this is Principal Bevan's first regional school committee meeting that he's attended. Sean, if you want to answer that question.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me join you. And Mary Ellen, nice job giving an overview so far. You're a hard act to follow. So we're all in uncharted territory here as far as many of these things, including how do you have kids and encourage kids to do the right thing related to mask wearing when we've not had to do that before. But I think all the practices we've grown used to doing and know work for kids to get them to comply with other things they don't love, I think will work. And so that would start out with gentle encouragement and insistence that these are the expectations of the school, and then to increase any consequence, overlay a consequence in if there's a secondary issue or a second instance of not wearing that mask, and then increase it to be a discipline issue if it becomes simply non-compliance. For some reasons, I think we'd have to figure out why that's happening. If it's one or two students, I think that becomes easier to work out. I think if it becomes a school-wide issue, that would fall to me as a building leader to communicate to students why this is important, and to ask parents to reinforce that message when students get home. So I think if it's a small issue and is singularly related to one or two students, I think we can handle that with escalating discipline as needed. If it's a school-wide issue, that's going to fall to me to increase my messaging and to reinforce our parents as partners in keeping everybody safe.
To tag on to Sean, we will also have extra masks at school for students who don't have them. They will be on the bus for students who might show up at the bus without a mask. So we will have them available for students who, if they forgot it, if it got broken, if they don't have one, we will have them for them.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Mary Ellen.
So Joan, just one question then. So Mary Ellen, you mentioned contacts. What if a family doesn't have 3 or 4 emergency contacts?
So our recommendation will be to try to get those, whether it's a neighbor or somebody, close by that could do it. But as long as someone can reliably pick up that student within the 30 minutes, that's our goal, really. As you know, like if you've ever been in a nurse's health office, I've had students in my health office for up to 4 hours when they've been dismissed for an illness reason. So that we really can't have that if we're questioning if it's a symptom of COVID for them to be there for 4 hours. So that's really the reasoning behind that. So I think we just that's the recommendation, and we just need to try and work towards that goal.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members?
Joan.
Yes.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. This is like a summer that wasn't, for sure, and thanks for all your work, all of you, and isn't. I just want to kind of get some information about nurse professional development, and what have you been doing with them, and do they work generally during the summer? Because I'm not sure, and if maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Karen.
Sure. So our nurses are not summer employees. But we actually have a meeting scheduled on Monday. They have they've been part of their school opening team. Some of them have been part of our regional opening advisory committee. So we have been in close contact. Some of them are working the summer program throughout the summer, and the guidelines, they have been working even though they haven't been working. So we'll continue with that professional development as the teachers will, prior to school starts, and all the education that goes along with it.
Thank you. And one follow-up to that, what is the summer program? And when did that start?
Is that to Greg?
So yeah, Mary Ellen's been intimately involved in the summer program.
Okay.
So the summer program was for some of our more intensive students in sub-separate programs. In person, it started remotely the beginning of July or the end of June, and it opened in person on July 15th. So this is the 3rd week that they've been in person. They've been there there's small classrooms, sizes of 4 to 5 students in most, and just as many adults in most of the classroom. They come in 2-hour sessions, and they have been following these guidelines that for the summer, we followed the summer guidelines. And so as we learn things, their guidelines have changed a little bit, and we've adapted through that, but they are following the guidelines that we will be following in the fall.
Thank you. That was actually my question, as to, how has it been going? So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been going well.
And just a comment, Marie Allen will be speaking about student support services, and she also will give a brief overview of the summer program as well.
Okay, any other questions from board members?
Joan, I have a question for Mary Ellen.
Sure, Chris.
My question would be is if a student is dismissed from a classroom and they have presumptive COVID symptoms, what happens to the remainder of the students that were in that class with those students? Is there a protocol for notification of parents or dismissal, or what exactly would the protocol be in that case?
So if a student is dismissed with symptoms of COVID, as we know that the symptom list of COVID covers basically every illness we would ever see in a health office, from a common cold to strep throat to an ear infection to a gastrointestinal bug. So what we would do in order that person would be dismissed, and our guidelines are that we recommend that they see their healthcare provider, and in order to return to school, the healthcare provider, we would need either, if they chose not to test, we would need an alternative diagnosis, like strep throat or an ear infection. That was the diagnosis. They would need to be symptom-free for what our guidelines are already, which is 24 hours before return to school, with that note from the provider. If they tested negative with no alternative diagnosis, they would need to remain out of school for 10 days from the symptom onset. So it basically be treated like a positive case. And if they tested positive, then we would work with the Department of Public Health and all of those seating assignments and buses assignments, and see who were the people who would have been considered close contacts.
Thank you.
And that is included in one of the links that the guidelines is. We're working, just to give you an additional, things are in progress all the time. We're working with our local pediatricians to set up a session as to what our protocols are and what we will need from them in order for students to return to school, and what we are expecting to happen, as well as we're working with having testing be more expedient.
Just a follow-up to that, if I could.
Sure, Paul.
So if that student who's dismissed from class ends up testing positive, I think that, historically, folks have been told if they were in contact with that person, they needed to quarantine themselves for a couple of weeks. Are we going to, via contact tracing records, put, maybe a couple of classes of kids remote for the next 2 weeks after that positive test is known, or will those kids still be on the hybrid model?
So if there was, if you were considered a close contact, you would need to quarantine for the 14 days. So that would be that we would do the contact tracing with the Board of Health to figure out who those close contacts were, and they would then be in a remote model for 14 days.
But it wouldn't be the entire class, you don't think?
It would not be the entire class at the high school level. Because if they are switching class at the elementary school level is different, but at the high school level, since it would be the people that were considered the closest to them in their seating arrangements.
Okay,
Through the chair, just to follow up on that, and a point of clarification, that if a student is asked to stay home because they've been in close contact, then they would be able to join the class remotely and obviously not be absent or penalized in any way. Okay.
So just when we speak to the learning and teaching models for reopening, one of the pieces of information we'll be sharing is what happens when we have students who are required to quarantine or self-isolate.
Okay, any other questions from board members? Okay, turn it over to Mr. Martineau.
So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Reinhorn to talk about the learning and teaching models for reopening at this point in time.
Thank you, Greg.
And Stephanie, if you can just tell me next slide, that would be helpful.
Excellent, thanks. So what you see on the slide in front of you is essentially the table of contents for the learning and teaching section of the district level draft reopening plans. And I'm going to take us through I'm going to take us through all of what's covered here, but we probably won't go through the actual guide for all of these. It'll be easier to see in slides. So the first thing is that just as we would with any school year, the transition back to school is a very important aspect of setting the foundation for the school year in terms of setting routines, establishing relationships and community. And that will be true this year more than ever, and regardless of what model we are in. So that is something that has come up in conversations throughout our planning process and is something that is on everyone's radar, that it is going to be very important for teachers to be able to spend the time setting routines and building relationships, because that is part of what they need then for all of the work that goes forward. Let's move to the next slide, please. So I already mentioned this, but I'm going to give you a little bit more information. We have 4 models that we have been defining, and we continue to add specificity to as we continue along. The first is the in-person learning model, and this just refers to if all students, or if the majority of students were back in school in person with all of the appropriate safety and health modifications that Mary Ellen just walked us through. That is what we're talking about when we talk about the in-person learning model. The hybrid learning model is when the majority of students are alternating between being physically present in school and participating in school remotely. During a hybrid model, there would be a limited number of students based on individual needs who attend school more frequently. The full remote learning model refers to if the health metrics dictated that students needed to be fully remote, and the majority of or all of our students moved to a remote model, then learning and teaching would be executed remotely. In this model, if the health metrics allow, we would still have a limited number of students who might be coming to school in person to address special education services that they might be part of their individual educational programs, which we will talk more about, and or if there are students who have other specific needs that make them a high priority for in-person learning. The 4th program is what we're calling the standalone remote program. And this is the program acknowledging the fact that we know there are some students who will not be able to return to school due to underlying medical conditions, and that the Commonwealth has asked all schools to have an option for families to opt into, in which, regardless of what the majority of students are doing, those students would be learning remotely for all of their learning and teaching. So those are the 4 models, just so you tie the concepts to the names. And what I'm going to do is walk through each of them and give you a little bit more detail. Next slide. So the in-person learning model, which is, it says 100% of students in person, but as I explained, we recognize that there will be a population of students that will not be in person regardless of the model. The first thing that we did, and we were asked to do back in June, was to conduct a feasibility study and to look at the spaces at Algonquin, the schedule, and sort of the capacity to be able to have all of our students in the building and achieve the health and safety requirements. What we determined, and Principal Bevan and his team and the facilities team and Keith Lavoie, spent a lot of hours working on this and actually physically in classrooms, as well as looking at scheduling. And they determined that they could achieve between 3 to 6 feet of distance student to student, but we could not meet the standard that the district has decided to adopt, which was 6 feet from student to student. We also analyzed what would be the impact on learning and teaching. And if we went with 3 to 6 feet as our distancing and we had all students in the classroom, I think a really important thing for people to be aware of is the significant impact it would have on the experience of students when they're in the building. Seated in rows, facing front, teachers' sort of instructional toolbox, if you will, would be quite restricted in terms of the ways that they work with students. Small groups would be virtually impossible to achieve inside of the classroom setting, other than having kids do it through their computers, which we might not need to be in the classroom to do that. So there's significant impact on the learning and teaching options if we were to have all students in the building. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's covers it for that. So next slide. Thanks, Greg. So hybrid learning model. So the next model is if we had students alternating with about half of them in the building at one time and half of them in remote learning. I'm going to first explain what's in front of you and what our thinking is now, and then I'll give a little bit of background because this has evolved, and I think people want to understand how it has evolved and why it has evolved. So what you have in front of you shows that students would be split into 2 cohorts for a hybrid learning model, cohort A and cohort B. On Mondays, and this is our current draft, all students would be remote in terms of the majority of students. I've already talked about the fact that a limited number might be in person throughout all of these models. So all students would be in remote learning mode, and it would be a teacher-facilitated remote day. With all of our models, a really important thing to realize that is a significant difference from the spring is that the school day is going to be a full school day, structured, at the start time, there will be start time to the day and end time to the day, regardless of whether students are in the building physically or in a remote setting. This was not true in the spring. In the spring, our directive was for our learning time to be reduced. We had a reduced schedule and a compacted schedule. The expectations both from the Department of Education, was that accountability structures were relaxed and all of those things. That is not true going into the fall. We will be addressing the full hours on learning that we would be in person, regardless of which model we're in. We will have accountability in terms of grading and feedback and attendance, and the day will feel like a school day. So on that Monday, students will have a schedule to follow, just like they would if they were in person for their remote day. They will have interaction with their teachers in each of their classes. And the teachers will be working to, that is an opportunity during the week to have their whole class together, cohorts A and B, and then, figuring out what the learning structures might be. It is, possible that for some teachers, they're on Zoom. It's possible that they start on Zoom and then move to small groups through Zoom, or that they start on Zoom and then are working on something. Those are the range possibilities. As we move to Tuesday through Friday, you can see that then we are in the cohorts A and B alternating. So while one group is in remote learning, the other group is in person in school. What this allows for is for the groups that are in school, we are at more approximately 50%. We then have less furniture in the rooms, more space to work with. We achieve the 6 feet of distancing in all rooms. And teachers have more instructional flexibility when they have fewer students in the room and can accomplish and have more intensive sort of learning and teaching opportunities with those groups of kids. The students who are in remote structured learning will have a structured day Aspects of it will be independent structured work that may have been set up or will have been set up by the teacher the prior day. Another significant difference from the spring is if we are in a hybrid learning mode, that in between days of in-person learning allows for exchange of materials from school, whether they're papers or books that students are using, if there's novels that they're reading or things like that. It also means that teachers can mindfully plan what are the things that need to happen in person that set us up for the structured learning that happens remotely. So, that'll be one of the opportunities that exists in a hybrid learning model. We are still, because there are so many moving parts in terms of which students will be in a standalone remote versus in person, staffing, there are a lot of things that are still being determined. We will be analyzing carefully what teachers are available to interact with students who are in remote learning, because the core teacher of a given course will be teaching the other half of the cohort if it's a Tuesday through Friday, but we will be analyzing our staffing capacity to still have supports and interaction with students who are in the remote learning mode. And one of the possibilities that someone brought up that we are actively exploring is whether streaming will be any aspect of the way we work on this remote learning. And we're looking at the technology required, the learning and teaching impacts, and all of the aspects of that. Okay, next slide, please. Full remote learning. I wonder, Greg, do you want me to go through all four before we do questions? I know this is a lot of information. Oh, you're muted. You were muted, Greg, so I didn't hear what you said.
My recommendation through the chair is to answer questions after each model.
Joan, can I ask a question?
I have
Yes,
one too.
Kathy Key?
So as far as the remote / in-person, the kids who are on the remote, will there be attendance taken? Like, how is the accountability? And have you guys thought about the possibility of keeping the kids full schedule, but like the days that the kids are at home versus in class, can they still like have the Zoom where they maybe not so much participate, but be like part of the class versus just having their independent, just to keep them more structured? Does that make sense?
I think so. So I'll
Maybe,
say a couple.
Principal Bevan can take this
Yes,
question.
that's what I was.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, Kathy, I do think there's a high appetite for kids to be a little bit more engaged and not be doing as much independent learning on the remote days, and so that is something we're still looking into. Our technological capabilities to have kids be more synchronously part of the class experience while in-person learning is happening. I think there are barriers to doing that, but I do know kids would like that, and I do know, I think teachers would like that as well. I think teachers didn't love when they'd have classes of remote learners that were a lot of static images on their screen where students weren't fully engaged and you couldn't see them. So I think we need to revisit how we're communicating about that, what our expectations of kids are for when they're at home and remote, and what that looks like. So I'd like to see, as much as possible, our remote learners be synchronously part of the classroom experience. I do think that there are going to be significant challenges of a teacher managing a fully in-person classroom while their learners on a screen. That's an environment we've not tried before. And so I think what I'm saying is we're aware that the appetite is very high for that. There may be barriers to doing that well. And we're going to have to, I think, explore those immediately and maybe even do a test run to see how hard that will be for teachers to pull off.
Yeah,
And
I think that I think think that kids need structure, and I worry about how much independence they have during the week versus you know what I mean,
Right.
the classroom structure.
think
And
you're
to
right.
answer your attendance question, Kathy, we did find out on Friday, just a week ago, that not only, I mean, we had known that we would be taking attendance and have been planning on that. But one of the things we found out is that we will actually be taking two different types of attendance. We will need to have attendance for remote days and for live days, and actually record those differently, because the state wants to be able to look at data in that way, which will be helpful for us as well. So those are details that we, you know, there's some of the guidance that keeps coming, and we are working through exactly how that will happen class by class and day by day.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up, Principal Bevan, if you could just speak to the schedule, you know, like what a schedule would look like. I think that's important.
Yeah, sure, Greg. I think the Monday part of the hybrid learning model is going to be really important, and we're beginning to identify what the guiding principles will be for the whole district, I think, including Northborough and Southborough at the lower levels on what we can expect of teachers and students, what we can expect of students as well. I think that day is going to be important for doing a few things. If you think about what the student experience is, and I think that should really guide most of our thinking, that's the only time all of their members of a given class are in the same virtual or physical space at one time. So they'd all be virtually in one room. And it's gonna be incumbent upon teachers to develop that as a classroom, a healthy classroom environment and as a group. And we're gonna be working with teachers to make sure that that's an enthusiastic day of synchronous experience for kids. I think it's also an opportunity for the teacher to lay out for the kids what the rest of the week will be and what their expectations will be. So I think that will be a day to stay organized, get organized, communicate enthusiasm, and to build and maintain classroom culture in each of their classes. We are still trying to determine what the how teachers will plan for the rest of that week, and how the experience of cohort A will be a little bit different than cohort B because they're a day off from each other. So I'm going to be working with my think tank group next week to do a thought exercise on how would you teach a week of geometry to a group of 20 learners who are broken into two groups of 10 that you're meeting every other day. We've never done it before, so I'm going to ask teachers from different disciplines to pitch back to me what they think the best way to come at that will be. So I think we'll know more by the end of next week on what, because best practices don't exist for this yet. We're going to have to develop them as we go.
Sean, could you also just speak generally around the schedule, like, you know, if being able to move from 100% in person to hybrid to a remote, in what the current schedule structure looks like, just briefly?
Sure, Greg. So a lot of the thinking we've been doing in planning for the various models have involved trying to make tackle the big decisions that will give us the greatest impact immediately. And one of the things that we concluded early on was that we need to go away from, until the pandemic is past us, I think we need to go away from our Monday through Friday schedule, where Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday have a rotating, moving, lengthy block in there. And so what we're looking at for each of our models is to have a static Monday schedule where students experience, even if they're in hybrid and remote, or hybrid and in person, that the schedule is static, 1 through 7 experience, and that would be the same as if we were fully in person, and also would transition easily to fully remote. So we made the strategic choice to go to that. And one of the things we were worried about was that lengthy block is designed to give primarily science students in science classes an opportunity to do lengthy labs, which there are barriers that are being reduced a little bit over time, but there are barriers to doing lengthy labs in person, side by side, sharing materials. So when we don't need to plan for that, and science teachers are planning exciting lessons outside of the real in-person lab experience that we were all used to and had growing up, once we were able to determine that the 80-minute block is not as necessary as it is in our regular in-person non-pandemic learning experience, we're able to go with a more routine schedule where the blocks are all the same length, and that routine schedule would be nearly identical in each of the models and allow us to seamlessly move between the models as the data suggests that we might need to.
Joan, if I could,
Yes, Paul Buckett?
so I have a comment and then a couple of questions. And the comment is, I like this Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, being consistent. I think from a planning point of view, I think that both the students and the parents of the students will appreciate it and not have to worry about is this the Monday, Wednesday, Friday week, or is this the Tuesday, Thursday week, and adjust appropriately. So I think that's pretty terrific. In terms of the cohorts, though, I'm curious, has there been thought given to how they're going to get created? And in particular, I wonder, could we create cohort A versus cohort B geographically to maybe manage our bus costs a little bit better? There's going to be, I think that there could be some opportunities to save a few dollars if we kind of took a look at it that way, and I'm not sure it would necessarily hurt. And then my other question about the cohorts and the scheduling would be, assuming there's sports, and I know that's a big assumption, but assuming there's sports, if I'm a remote student on a Tuesday, say, and my team is scheduled for either a practice and or a game, how do I get to school? Is that going to be just all on me, or have we given that any thought? Those are my couple of questions.
Okay.
Stephanie, can I just, so we will be talking about transportation a little bit deeper into the reopening plan. And I think we'll answer those questions, Paul. And we'll also be talking about extracurricular and sports and the scenarios that you just mentioned. But Stephanie, the cohort.
Sure, I will speak to the cohorts. So our current approach to the cohorts is that we want to make sure, one of the things we heard from families is that having the members of a family on the same schedule, if we're in a hybrid, is crucial. So our current approach is that we are using last names as a starting point. We realize that not all families have a single last name. So we will be making adjustments to make sure that families are in sync with each other. But this allows us to have families on the same schedule across all of our schools. But it won't be perfect doing it by last name. So then Principal Bevan and his team will be working internally to look if there is any balancing that needs to happen of those cohorts. Once they are able to then, see which students are taken out because of the standalone remote, and seeing how it plays out in the scheduling and the use of space. We have explored the idea of thinking about it from a geographical perspective, and I think Keith will be able to speak to kind of where we are with our busing costs for any of the models when we get to transportation.
Okay, any other questions from board members for this section on the hybrid learning model?
Can I just ask, I do have one question. Sean, can you just speak to the hybrid model and what AP might look like in science?
And what AB might look like? Is that
I'm sorry, advanced placement courses in science with a hybrid model.
Oh yeah, I don't know that they would look any different, Greg, than our other courses. I think the learning outcomes would the expectations would be higher because these are college level courses. So I would need to get more information from Lori Zanini to find out what the College Board is communicating and report back. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the one last thing I wanted to add about this that, Paul, you sort of made reference to the fact that this schedule allows for consistent days for families and for educators to be able to say, this isn't, well, for educators, they're live every day, but for families to be able to say, my child goes to school in person on Wednesday and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday. And that is, I said I would talk a little bit about how this has evolved. And that is one of the things that changed. When we surveyed families in the spring about hybrid models, we offered week on, week off as an option for them to weigh in on versus split week, where it was what you referenced, Paul, which was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the following week come Tuesday, Thursday. So it was basically alternating days. There was a slight preference. I mean, it was fairly even, but there was a preference for alternating days. And one of the primary pieces of feedback for that was more consistent contact between educators and students, meaning that a week of remote for both the educators, and the results were almost the same from families as from educators, but a week of remote and then a week in person for many people felt like too long to go between in-person contact. The Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, one of the biggest concerns about it was what you named, Paul, which was, lack of consistency day to day for people to be thinking about sort of how they organize their own schedules outside of school, and just simply knowing what day do I go to school when I wake up in the morning. Is this an in-person day or not? So that is one of the reasons that we moved to this model. And then the additional, we did an analysis for every single hybrid model with the actual calendar for the school year to compare time on learning for each cohort compared to each other, looking at holidays and all of those things and ways we would shift. And the other reason that we shifted to this was what Principal Bevan spoke to, which was the power of that Monday to have the whole class together to set up the learning for the week. Okay, I think we're ready.
I have, not quite, I have one question.
Okay.
Okay.
If I may.
Okay.
I'm trying to picture how the remote structured learning days are going to work. So failing, as Sean was just talking about, having some sort of a Zoom to those kids who are at home, so they're sort of participating in the live class. Failing that, is the idea that the teacher assigns some work to be done on the at-home days and the kids do it? And if that's the case, are they really following the same structure for that day as the kids who would be in school? Or how do you envision that working?
Yeah, Paul, I think failing that is a good, yes, I think you're right. If we're not able to have like a Zoom in the room is the phrase I'm hearing, way to do that, where kids are sitting in front of their computer and hearing the live instruction that's happening, there will be a level of independent learning where students are working through something that is structured by the teacher and developed by the teacher that is designed to keep their learning progressing. What we're eager to avoid is have the students have half the amount of in-person learning time and simply achieve half the amount of progress that they might in a given year. What we're aiming for is to have progress as closely as possible, meet the same level of the same pacing that we've achieved in the past, but to be more inventive about how we approach that. I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but if we're not able to do the live streaming kind of Zoom in the room approach, teachers are going to have to develop a remote learning experience for kids where their learning progresses independently.
I just add to that.
Okay, go ahead, Greg.
I'll just add to that too. So we are anticipating that we will have a contingency of staff due to underlying health concerns who will only be able to work remotely. And we are looking at deploying those staff to support learning for students in maybe a tutoring fashion or a just-in-time support fashion on those remote learning days.
And I will just add to that Sean and I have been in conversation also about the fact that when we have course placements done, we also, with the cohorts, there are some courses with smaller enrollment that may not need to be split across two cohorts, and we might make sure they're in a single cohort. And then we can analyze for what is the availability for our our educational support professionals, our teachers, and other educators who are not working with students in person to be working with our remote students. So in addition to the faculty that Greg mentioned, we do anticipate that there will be other faculty that we can use as support systems. And the other thing I think is important to remember is in the spring, we were not bringing any students into the building, and we are anticipating that we will be able to bring a number of students, and we'll be talking about this in more detail. But students who are on individual education programs, students who are English language learners, or for other reasons or have significant needs. So we will be able to have some of those students in the building getting the support that they need on their independent work, if it's an independent work day, or participating in the services that are appropriate for them.
Okay, so does that mean that the students who are at home are expected to follow the same schedule as those who are in the building?
Well, I think that's going to depend on, as Sean said, as we further investigate kind of to what degree are we using the Zoom in the room. I like that new expression, versus, other types of supports. What we can say is that students who are remote learning, they will be following a schedule. And I guess it will, Sean, you can speak to this, but I guess it will be in sync in the sense that the high school has decided that they're using the same schedule every day. And we are going to be structuring remote learning to have, more of a sense of schedule. But it is going to depend on where we land with the Zoom in the room as to how much that impacts students who are working from home.
Yeah, I think that will dictate what the experience looks like for our remote learners. If it doesn't work, I think we'll be developing a system, a schedule where a student should be able to follow along and complete the work in the time that is structured for them. That would give them the kind of continuity of experience every day that will be helpful for most learners and for most families as well. So that if you're on Tuesday, if you're a remote learning student in cohort A, that you wake up, you have the same patterns and the same habits that you have on the days that you're in person, but now you're working from home, independent of whether or not we can pull off the Zoom in the room kind of experience.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from board members before we continue? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I actually think many of the things we've been talking about apply in a full remote setting as well. So there's a lot of work going on at the school level on defining the remote if we are in full remote. But a few things that are highlighted in this table. One is that, again, there will be a structured school day with a start and a finish. Right now, we've named that as 8:30 to 2:30, but the actual times we'll figure out, but it will be equivalent to a full day of learning as if students were in person. We're both responsible for and committed to them having that full structured learning time. It is across all the disciplines as well, in the sense that we will have to figure out how we are adapting the curriculum in certain courses to make it remote, but we're committed to the full range of courses. The approach will be much like what we described for Monday of the hybrid model, which is that they will be following their schedule just like they would if they were in person. Teachers will have their schedule of their day and students will have their schedule of their day. Students who receive services documented in their IEPs or our English language learners will be receiving those services. And as we've said, some of them may be doing that in person. And we already talked a little bit about attendance and grading, but the accountability will be significantly different than it was in the spring. And it will, be like an in-person model as opposed to what was happening in the spring. So students will be assessed and given feedback and graded throughout the remote learning days, and receiving full credit for those courses and everything. Sean, do you want to add anything more specific about the way your team has been thinking about this?
No, I think that is similar to what I was saying in the earlier slide about hybrid. I think the Mondays will be important to make sure that teachers are being really strategic about how they use Mondays to outline the work for the week. But in a fully remote learning model, it will be that continuity of 8:30 to 2:30 or whatever the schedule we go with, that kids are having continuity through their day where they're expected to show up, and that we have expectations that are a little bit higher than we've been able to do in the spring model. And kids do respond to the motivation of getting feedback from teachers, and that feedback also looks like grades. And we all have grown up in systems where grades are important, and kids have bought into that. And I think that's a chance for students to kind of to be a little bit more motivated than maybe what we saw from disengaged students in the spring. They'll be responding to the accountability that we're allowed to now, and that we're required to actually implement in this system. So I think teachers will look forward to that, and I think teachers will respond, students will respond well to it.
And the other thing that I'll add is that if you think back to that graphic that sort of showed the whole picture of everything we're working on, the professional learning and the opportunities for collaboration are a really important part of how we're thinking about any of these really about any of these models. But, as Sean said earlier, this is a whole new set of best practices. This is a whole new terrain that our educators and our students are navigating. And we're not underestimating the power of devoting time to professional learning, not just at the beginning of the year, but throughout the year, and to collaboration among the teachers. And, in the conversations we've had with educators, they get very excited about sort of the possibilities of, in some ways remote allows for even more collaboration, because we have some flexibilities in using Zoom to get teachers together as well. So they get very excited about the possibilities, and we're going to be capitalizing on the professional learning and collaboration so that we are using this time in innovative and motivating ways for students. We want them to be on and off the computer throughout the day, not just, static, as Sean said, sitting facing the screen. And that's the sort of planning that we'll be doing together so that we can make it a dynamic experience on and off of Zoom.
And Stephanie, if I may, I also think that PD, I think initially my thought goes to what kind of platforms exist, what kind of technological training do teachers need to make that remote learning an exciting experience for our kids. But I also think the PD will need to include things like the soft skills of having teachers being able to re-engage disengaged students, and how to interact with kids in a way online that is a little bit of a different experience. So I think there'll be a call for our student support services folks to help with some of that training that is totally independent of a new online platform or a new technological tool or a Zoom feature that may be a new one that we need to know about. So I think we need to be really holistic about our teacher training to make sure that we're equipping teachers with the technological tools that they need, but also a new range of and a new array of teacher tools that are allow them to access kids' social emotionally and make sure that they're meeting those needs as well.
I have a question for Stephanie, Greg, or Sean, and I don't know whether it can be answered, but we have the school hours there for students. Will teachers, Sean, do you see it as having your regularly scheduled faculty meetings or department meetings that normally would take place if we were not in a pandemic and we were going through a regular 180 school year?
So I think, Joan, are you asking, are we able to have as many or as regularly scheduled staff meetings as we would in an ordinary year?
Probably not as many, but are you still scheduling faculty meetings and department meetings so that the teachers, as Stephanie said, can collaborate together?
Well, we don't have the full remote model nailed down yet, but as we're creating it, we will prioritize time for teachers to work together. And ordinarily, or the thinking we're applying to this, would allow for some time blocks that might be used on one day for teacher teams, small teacher teams to work together, but with some forecasting or forewarning, we could do a full-blown staff meeting on the Friday to use that static block that all professionals have open, let's say. So we are prioritizing, as we're building these models, time for adults to work with adults. And when with great planning, or not great planning, but any planning, we're going to be able to use that time to have anything as large as a full-blown staff meeting, or as small as 2 teachers working together who are co-teaching a unit on whatever it is in whatever discipline.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
so I'll just add to that. Our intention is, again, to maintain our schedule as if we were 100% in person, so that when we move through models, whether it's 100% in person, hybrid, or remote, it's the same teacher expectation in terms of workday and meeting schedules and so forth. What might shift or change is, again, if we're in a hybrid, maybe those meetings, maybe we don't want to get 150 faculty members together in one room. So maybe that looks like a Zoom meeting versus an in-person faculty meeting. But we are trying to maintain the schedules and structures around professional collaboration, student schedules consistent, so that we can move, in and out of these models. And our hope is we end the year in 100% in-person model with no restrictions.
Joan, can I ask a question?
Sure, Kathy.
So question A is, so all the kids, if they're on remote in the high school, they'll follow their schedule and they'll go to their classes Zoom every period. My second part is how are you going to manage electives? So if they chose to do wood tech or metals or cooking or preschool, like all those kind of things, what will take place of those? Because you can't do that remotely.
Yeah, Kathy, I think each one of those we'll be deciding independently. So I can give you 2 examples of how we're thinking about that. So we have a metal shop, and the teacher is worried that even in a hybrid model, it requires such close contact where the instructor is showing and working with kids on how to safely work with metals. And we're going to flip-flop him into that class into the second semester, hoping that we're able to have that class in the second semester, knowing that doing that class well in the first semester even in a hybrid model, is going to be very difficult. So we're looking at class by class, which ones can be done and done safely, and in what way. Another example would be Tiny Tomahawks is our preschool program that is a really wonderful experience, both for our older kids, to have the early childhood education experience that they gain from that, but also the little kids, the 4-year-olds who are in there and interacting with our teenagers. What we're looking at with that is to have a process by which the students get their early childhood education lessons, and then they develop kits to be mailed home to the 4-year-olds, so that they can then do an online experience instead of coming into the building. And then, of course, our hope is that we're able to be fully in person at some point, and then we're able to really smoothly transition in. So those electives, by their very nature, are many of them are hands-on, and each of them are going to require like one-off kind of attention to detail, and determining how best to transition that class into a hybrid model or into a fully remote model. And so I don't know exactly what the wood shop or metal shop looked like in the spring. I have to talk to Mr. Clark, who runs those courses, to find out what do they transition those kids into that experience and look like. So I can get that information back to you. But we do have a plan for the hybrid model, and that plan is course specific.
I'll just add that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education just released career technical education guidelines. So that was released this week, I believe, and that will give us some good indication of some thinking and framing those courses that we'll have to do some modifications.
Joan, could I ask a question?
Sure, Sean.
I'm also wondering about maybe if there are any courses that are going to be eliminated or modified, particularly PE and music courses, because at this time DESE is not recommending, choral or wind instruments due to spread and that. So what's the thinking about how to approach those courses?
Sean, do you want
I,
to speak to that?
yeah,
or-
Sean, do you want to take that?
Well, I can tell you, Sean, that guidance just, well, you probably know, you're in, certainly you get the same emails I get, but so the guidance just came out on Friday of last week. Going into that, we had developed a plan for those classes to happen outdoors, weather permitting, and at six feet distance, and all the, our plan for chorus and for band or instruments that are wind instruments reflected the best information at that time. Now it looks like the new guidelines indicate that those aren't advised, but if they are going to happen, they need to happen at 10 feet distance for kids and with masks at all times. So we feel like I will be meeting with Amy Collins, who's our department head, to see what her desires are to run those courses, but we feel like we could probably run those outdoors in a space that we've already identified out behind the band room on the grass at 10 feet distance, so that kids can still have that experience, weather permitting. And then when the weather doesn't agree with us, we would have to have the students work on a more academic task or a task that might involve technology that allows students to work together, sing together, which platforms do exist for that purpose.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good that you're attempting to keep those in, because those are important for many kids.
Yeah, kids really do love those courses, of course, and we want to try to give them those courses both give them something, it gives them an outlet, and I've had many kids indicate that that's their highlight of their day. They get a chance to express themselves and enjoy the company of their friends doing something they love. So we do want to protect that, but we want to be safe in doing that. So right now the new guidelines are 10 feet with masks. We feel like we can maybe do that. I don't know, Stephanie, if I'm speaking out of turn here, because I think how we unpack that and come at that problem will also have impacts on the middle school. And so I'm meeting with Gary Hershuk at Trottier and Michelle Karb at Milliken on Tuesday to find out how they plan on responding to the new guidelines. We're having that meeting on Tuesday.
So can I just add a comment too, Sean, that again, I think our theory and conceptual ideas, we're trying to maintain the courses and the schedule as best possible. And we may need to reimagine chorus. So it might be, chorus might turn into music appreciation, because again, we want to be able to move back in and out of these models seamlessly. And we want, if we're able to meet in person at 100% with no restrictions in January, we want to be able to have chorus. So our thinking is to kind of reinvent these courses in terms of curriculum and instruction, but keep the structures there so we can move in and out of the models.
That's
Okay,
great.
thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
I have one, if I could, Joan.
Sure, Paul Bucker.
So I guess mostly I'm just looking for assurances. Someone mentioned earlier that we're trying to kind of invent new best practices for both the hybrid model and the full remote model. That there's different professional development that needs to be provided to the teams, and I'm just I guess I'm just looking for assurances that we haven't spread ourselves too thin and are trying to do too much, and that maybe in our zeal to try and get kids back into the building, we're not developing as robust a plan as we could because we're developing so many plans. Someone talk to that?
Sure. I think I'll say a couple things and others might want to add on. So, the first thing is that the health metrics can change at any moment. And as we experienced in the spring, we need to be able to pivot and move between the models. And we are also, responsible and need to have detailed plans for all of these things. And I think we feel confident that by planning for all of them, there are a lot of aspects of it that transfer across. So as we plan for hybrid, a lot of the teaching and learning, collaboration and planning is going to also transfer to the full remote or to full in person, and vice versa. So yes, it'd be wonderful if we only had to plan for one and could go a whole lot deeper on that one. But I think, one of the things we've had to accept is that's not the world we live in. And so we're trying to be as efficient um, and see the connections and the opportunities for the ways that our development of anyone is also development of the others, if that makes sense.
And I'll just add, there was a tremendous amount of learning that took place with NSBRO Connect 2.0 in terms of what works well with remote teaching and what doesn't. So our teachers are coming in with 2.5 months of living this remote world. And the key pieces for me, again, is that consistent schedule and structure and clear expectations on students and teachers, but also that attendance piece and grading piece. Those are layers of accountability that did not necessarily exist in NSBRO Connect 2.0. Those were kind of unhinged from what we were trying to do. And I think we'll be able to, again, have more accountability for our students around those two areas.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from board members? Okay, thank you. Continuing.
Okay, so the fourth model is the standalone remote program. And this, as I mentioned previously, is an acknowledgement of the fact that there are a group of students who will opt to start remote from the get-go, regardless of what the majority of the population of the student population is doing. So even if the school is in a hybrid model, the standalone remote program will run. This will be an option that families will elect. Our staffing of this model, back up. So in terms of the students, they will opt in, and we do not have that information yet. We have from surveys some sense of approximate numbers of what percentages we're talking about, but we don't have specifics of the students. And in terms of staffing, as we discussed earlier when we were talking about staffing, there are a few different options of the ways that we can staff supporting a cadre of learners who are purely remote. One is that we will have some staff who need to be purely remote themselves. And so those may be, an asset for us that they are able to focus purely on remote learning. Another option is that we may be able to shift our in-person as we know specifically which students are going to be remote learners. That means we're shaving them off of the schedule of in-person learners, which may shift, the scheduling for in-person learning and make it possible for us to use some teachers who might become part of the remote learning team. There are a lot of different options that we're exploring in terms of how to make this work. As we highlighted, some of the directives around this have just come to us in the last week from the state. But one of the things that the state is working on is some supports and they've been a little bit vague, but they basically have said that they are working on a state option for standalone remote, which we assume means some third-party courses that students could enroll in, but we actually don't have the specifics on that. So while we are anxious to hear what the state has to offer, because they are negotiating contracts that would be, at a much lower price point than we could individually, we are also doing our own exploration of third-party courses that we might be able to use in order to offer a full complement of courses to students who are in remote learning. If we were using third-party courses.
Stephanie, can I just add some commentary too? So In terms of virtual courses, this is not a new topic for our district. We've been using virtual learning and courseware for the past 6 years in two ways, either whether it's credit recovery for some of our students, or if students needed acceleration, we have offered virtual courses to many of our students. And also, I'll add, and Kathleen Palechko can attest to this, that maybe 7, 8 years ago, it was our intention to really think about outside the box and create a virtual learning academy. So a school within the school model. So a lot of the tenets of that work that was done 7 or 8 years ago, which was not approved by the state, still is usable in this particular model.
So I think I'll just say that there's a lot of moving parts in this, because as you can imagine, it interacts with whether it's the hybrid or the in-person models. So, it's hard to have the exact specifics until we start nailing down who's participating. At the same time, we realize people want specifics in order to make the decisions. So we continue to work hard on this. I think a really important question that many people have asked is, if a student starts in the full remote, standalone remote, are they able to make a transition to the hybrid or one of the other models? And the answer to that is that we would work just as we do with course changes and other types of transitions. We would work closely with the family to make sure that we are having a coherent learning experience for the student. But also we would need to address the safety requirements. So we would need to make sure that we have the space in the classes to have the 6 feet of distancing. So there would be some time involved in making the transitions, but people would be able to make the transitions, and it would be done in consultation, with the school. I think that's the big picture, Sean, unless you have anything to add. Okay.
I'll just add that, so again, this is the district reopening plan. And this also speaks to what Sean had shared, having his school-based leadership team and his think tank take this work also and really put some details around it. And that work has been happening in parallel to this district reopening plan.
Okay, any questions for the stand-alone remote program or clarification? Okay, seeing none.
So the next section is student support services and English language development. And we have Marie Allen and Rhoda Webb who will speak to these areas.
Okay, before going through and reviewing this slide of information, I'd like to share that we are currently providing remote and in-person learning for our extended school year services. So we've just finished our 3rd week of in-person learning at 2 of our schools. So for the region, Algonquin is the school where the students are attending. We had full training done by Mary Ellen Duggan and Dr. Medina for the health and safety protocols that our staff were to follow. And Keith Lavoie trained our staff on the cleaning protocols to make them aware of what was being done in the buildings to keep them safe. The students have been observed to be wearing their masks daily, and they receive mask breaks throughout the day. And the staff are all following the mask, face shield, gloves, and gown protocol information. We are, as an administrative team, we are there full time. I split my time between the 2 buildings, and my other assistant directors are in the buildings. We receive the students off of the vans and off of parent drop-off, as well as in the afternoon. And we also walk through the classrooms and are available to staff. Everything has gone well so far, and uh, we're very happy that the learning is able to take place in person for those students with complex and significant needs. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. Moving on to the information for student support services for the fall reopening. We are adhering to the tenets of special ed law that is providing each child with a free and appropriate public education. What does that really mean? That means that we are following the student service delivery grids. We are providing instruction on those student services, the support grids. That also means that we are not providing distance learning plans in this model. That model goes away. So we will be making sure that instruction is the primary that is happening when we return to school, and that the supports and resources are supplements to what the students receive, where that could have been part of the actual instruction when we were for the March to June opening with the distance learning plans. The students will receive all services documented in their IEPs through in-person instruction, remote instruction, or a combination of the two. That also means that if there's any change in the way they receive those services, the instructional services, notification will be provided to each parent on how those supports and resources, on how the instruction looks different versus the supports and resources that are supplement to the plan. The district will aim to maximize in-person learning to the extent feasible. Currently, we're working on the process of identifying all students with complex and significant needs as was defined by the DESE criteria that was published for the fall reopening on July 9th. We are also looking at one-to-ones and how the one-to-ones will be distributed and disseminated according to the in-person instruction. And they will be fully trained and have been fully trained for the ones that have done the ESY programming. Staff and ESPs will continue to receive that training for the fall reopening. And students will have in-person opportunities for inclusion and social groups for all models that are being discussed today. The district will aim to maximize in-person learning for all pre-K students. That doesn't apply for the region, but we are bringing back our pre-K students, or looking at that model to bring them back for the 5-day model. And I think that I'm just looking over some Q&A that was submitted as well, and I just want to make sure that we have addressed all that, but I think I did in this slide. So Rhoda, do you want to talk about the English learners and the English language development instruction?
Yes, good morning. Thanks, Marie. As we know at Algonquin, most of our English learners are at the foundational level, that is the beginning stages of learning English, and have come to our country as adolescents. So at this time, we're looking at the numbers and analyzing those in order to be able to have our English learners in school in person with a lot more frequency. Since we do have the ELD courses and of course their content courses. So that is something that is being, we're taking a look at this time.
So I'm also going to, there's a question around freshman orientation that's connected to the teaching and learning piece that I thought was important to have Sean address.
Yeah, Greg, I saw that in the chat. So I met with our freshman orientation team last week, and it's a little bit difficult to plan the freshman orientation because we don't know what we're orienting them to. So I've asked them to plan in the same way that we are planning multiple scenarios for multiple, whichever model we're in ordinarily. And for me coming in new, I'm have to learn what the previously existing system is. And it sounds like a really great, well-designed system that orients kids and acquaints them to the building and some of our, the physical layout and our schedule and all those things that you imagine freshman orientation to be. It's led primarily by older kids, by our mentors. And so we have 150 mentors who are going to be leading that training, but we don't know exactly what it will look like, but we have some plans in development. So for example, one of the big elements of that event is a dance. And so as you might imagine, we're not going to be able to do a dance. So they're planning on developing something that if we're hybrid, maybe is in person, but socially distant, but if we're fully remote, would be a fully remote fun event like a trivia night or something like that. Similarly, parents, there's a parent program for that happens at the same time as the evening dance program for the kids. If we're able to do that in person, which is not looking likely, we would do that instead remotely. So I've met with our student services folks to have a portion of that event, that orientation event, include support for parents who are transitioning their kid into a new and uncertain environment. So we do have these multiple scenarios playing out, and my staff has been very flexible and they're thinking of all the different ways they can make it be enthusiastic and to build the culture of that class, which is so important in a regional district where you're having multiple towns arrive to your building. You need to find a way to get them to work and cohere as a graduating class together. And my team is doing that currently. So it requires revisiting and reinventing some things. And so I will report back when that finalizes, but we're in pretty good shape there.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee members for the Student Support Services and the English Language Learners? Okay, seeing none.
So the next section is technology, and Julie was on the call but had to jump on to another webinar. So I will address this section. So the first is really a learning management platform. So as you know, we've been using Canvas at Algonquin as our consistent learning management system. Some of the feedback we received during NSBoro Connect 2.0 was really around that even though we had a consistent LMS, that the way courses were structured within that system was inconsistent. So I know that the high school and the instructional technology specialist has really looked at coming up with a standard course so that when students enter into a course, regardless of teacher, there's some structure to that Canvas that they can rely on. And that was feedback that we received from parents, and we are implementing that this fall in a hybrid or a remote and an in-person model, regardless. In terms of purchasing Zoom-based Zoom licenses, so we are using Zoom as our video conferencing software. In the spring, we were using the free version of Zoom. We've actually purchased the professional license, which allows us to dictate the security settings across all users, people who are using Zoom. It allows us also to, if there is an issue, to work collaboratively with Zoom to investigate. They have some channels. And overall, Zoom has been a really strong tool for us and allows for that virtual learning to take place. And just in terms of the chat, there were a couple suggestions around, could teachers share their screen in Zoom and wear a wireless mic so remote students could follow along. So we're looking at all of those features and those opportunities. And the other thing that's important is that Zoom actually integrates into Canvas. So students will be accessing Zoom through the learning management system within Canvas. So it's our closed container. And we are, as Sean mentioned, we're also looking at, in terms of attendance, a lot of students had their cameras off last year during Zoom sessions. So we're talking about having attendance requirements with cameras on. So there's a lot of work that's happening in that area. We're also working, we are also moving to a one-to-one environment. We are issuing laptops to every student unless a student chooses to use his or her own device. And this has been a shift and very important during a pandemic. Obviously, we do not want device sharing, so we want a single user using a single device. And also, we want to be able to ensure that students have access to technology, whether it's in 100% remote, hybrid, or in person, and moving in and out of those models. And then student online safety. So, I think it's essential. Cyber safety and it's, etiquette in the virtual world is essential. And if we're relying on a hybrid model or a remote model, that these types of learning will be essential the first 6 weeks of school in terms of what the expectations are, and doing more work around online safety. And then just lastly, I'll just share, professional learning for our teachers around, we've done a lot of PD around the tools, but again, launching the year with more professional development, learning opportunities around, asynchronous learning, synchronous learning. What are the tools? How do you use the tools? What are the security features in Zoom? How do those work? More systematic professional learning for teachers. We had a lot of just-in-time support, but making sure that there's a foundational level across all Algonquin faculty and staff.
Okay, any questions from the committee members for technology?
I have one.
Okay, Sean?
Just the one-to-one devices. Will students, when they come in, when they're in person, will they need to bring a device with them? Or is that unknown yet?
When they are in person, they will need to bring a device with them.
Okay, I think some clarity around that. Obviously, there's a lot to clear up, but I think some clarity around that, so people can make decisions, whether they're using their own and what the requirements are, and that it is a requirement, because in the past it was sort of a soft requirement, but it was haphazard.
So I will share that, we have a whole communication planning around, the one-to-one and technology that Julie is working on as well.
Any other questions from board members? Okay, seeing none.
So the last section or actually, I think the second to the last section of the district reopening guide focuses on school facilities and operations. And much of the work we've been doing in late June and early July has been around feasibility studies. And I just want to, thank Keith Lavoie for his work around planning for the operations. It's been a tremendous workload. And I think of the two directors, having to really think differently. It's Keith with the director of operations and Mary Ellen in terms of health and wellness. It's been an incredible amount of work, and I just want to begin by complimenting the two of them. Not that the other directors have not worked hard, but they've done a tremendous amount of work in a short period of time. So Keith.
Thank you, Greg. Do appreciate that. But I do also want to thank the facilities manager at Algonquin, Mike Gorman, and his team for preparing Algonquin for what is ahead of us and the unknown of that. He has been instrumental in all of this, and I've been relying on him heavily. I've also been in contact with Principal Bevan frequently about the needs of Algonquin. It is our largest facility in the district with 350,000 square feet. So there's certainly a lot to consider as it unfolds. As you can see from the slide, there are a variety of different areas I'm going to touch upon. I'm going to try not to duplicate some of the things that were mentioned because there is a lot of overlap. But when it comes to preparing for spaces, we will have some images for people to see of what the classrooms are going to look like. But if you can imagine that desks are going to be spread out as much as possible, we may be leaving a majority of the desk in the classroom and then assigning students to every other seat. The idea is that if these desks are just by themselves, they might migrate a little bit and then impede on that 6 feet of distance. But with every desk being in the room and students being assigned accordingly, we'd be able to guarantee that 6 feet of distance a little greater, which would be our achievement in a hybrid model. When it came to the all in-person model that we did do a lot of work on for its feasibility, which got us to a 3 feet distance, it was going to be possible by square footage to get our students into the classrooms at 3 feet of distance. Mike and his team did a lot of simulation with that, and we were able to achieve it. However, when we look at a hybrid model, we are able to achieve 6 feet of distance with approximately 50 to 60% capacity. So that was something we did. Also, a little more the interesting about the learning spaces. We wanted to remove all unnecessary furniture, and we will be collaborating with teachers on that in the weeks ahead. We also investigated different ways of keeping students separate, one of which was plexiglass. Plexiglass is a big topic. We see it everywhere that we go. But as far as the school district is concerned, we have outfitted our reception areas at Algonquin with plexiglass to protect our staff members and our visitors. However, in the classroom, we have not added plexiglass. And the reason being is because for a majority of the summer, plexiglass was not necessarily advised when it came to student separation. In fact, it was identified as an additional touch point, which would therefore have to be cleaned. So collectively, we have decided just to stay with the reception areas for now, and perhaps if things become available and we adjust, plexiglass could be introduced. But at this point, it is just going to be for the reception areas. Along the way, we have been consulting with Fire Chief Parenti about the fire code and all the things that we have to do and make sure we're doing along the way, keeping our egresses clear and anything away from the ceiling as much as possible to make sure that we are as safe as can be when we are in the learning spaces. So these were all parts of the evaluation related to the learning spaces. Mask breaks are going to look a little different at every level, but as I've been working with Principal Bevan, we want it to be a little more organic. Like if a student needs to go to the bathroom at the high school, they would be able to do that a little more independently. We might be instituting the same type of thing for a mask break, but then designating certain areas where the kids can take an opportunity to take their mask off, to ensure that they are at the maximum distance that we can get. So mask break areas will be defined throughout the building.
If I could just jump in on that, I don't want to interrupt you, but
No,
the way
go
we're
ahead.
building our bail schedule is to have a little bit longer time for passing time and to give students some options for using that passing time outdoors. So we have a courtyard that's never, to my knowledge, ever been allowed to be used as a way to get from one place to another. We're instituting that. We have a couple of spaces to go from one exterior door to another. And to the extent that we can do that safely and make sure we're not opening ourselves up to outsiders coming into our building, we're going to do that. And that will afford kids an opportunity to be outdoors, which I think we're all really hoping for. And when the weather permits, kids can use that opportunity to navigate to their next class, be outdoors for some period of time, take a break from their mask, be distant from each other. And we feel like that will be a good outcome.
That's a great point, Sean. It also leads me to say that some of the classes as well will be able to be outdoors. We're investigating different options available as well. So not just mask breaks, but academic time will be included as part of the things that we're investigating. One of the main focuses of the last a few weeks has been an HVAC evaluation of all 10 schools. I want to thank Kailash Viswanathan for helping us with that report. It is very detailed. It's very comprehensive. He has children in the schools, and he definitely has an invested interest, and he has been genuinely amazing. I can't say enough about him. He has been available and ready to answer any question, no matter if it's large or small. When it comes to Algonquin and its HVAC system, it is elaborate. There are different types of units in different spots, and Mike Gorman is collaborating closely with the manufacturers and our HVAC vendors to make sure we are doing the best thing possible to maximize the outside air intake. So one of the key elements of his evaluation is that we want to maximize the fresh air that comes in as much as we can, as well as make sure we're maximizing the use of our equipment so that it doesn't burn out and it doesn't have inefficiencies in other ways. So this is a delicate balance. We also are considering in many places keeping the windows open for a majority of the time while students and staff are in the building, but that's not always advised with the equipment for particular areas. So this will be something that Mike can dig deep with, with Sean and with the teachers, just so they know what the expectations are. But typically, what we're going to do is try to keep the windows open and keep the fresh air coming in as much as possible. Connected to that is the wellness areas, our nurse's office and our medical waiting room, which is part of the DESE guidelines. And Mary Ellen did comment on that earlier. We are ensuring that that has proper filtration and ventilation, and this is part of an ongoing work that we're doing. So Mr. Gorman and I will be collaborating with vendors to ensure that those spaces are venting and filtrating properly, and we will be adding equipment to those rooms as necessary. Also, one thing that has come up a couple of times is the use of fans, classroom fans, especially in the areas of the building that tend to get a little more warm. The advisement we're getting is that fans will be allowed, however, they cannot be oscillating. They have to be fixate on a student or on a teacher so that the air does not flow over other students. That's something that is a critical part of making sure we don't contribute to the spread, and that we do anything we can to mitigate that impact. Sean is thinking very thoughtfully about the hallways, about the lockers, and about the passing and the stairwells and all those different things. We will have signage up around the building to give people guidance, and that we are looking at the hallways. Some of them are very wide, and will be able to allow for two-way of traffic and students to be able to check in at their lockers. But I think collectively the use of lockers is going to be reduced significantly. And that the access in the hallways, we want to make sure we monitor it closely. So I think at Algonquin in particular, we're going to be monitoring that closely. I'll be working with Sean and his administrative team to make sure that we're monitoring the hallways during these passing periods and ensuring that they are safe and students are able to keep that distance that we want to achieve. And I also think it's part of an education campaign with the kids. Like everything that Sean's mentioned, we're going to have to be reminding, and maybe reminding a few times about, keeping a distance from the person in front of you and making sure that you're not just congregating in areas of the building, which is, naturally part of a social high schooler. So this will be stuff that we will work on with the kids as directly related to operations. Shared items. This is more of an issue that we have at the elementary school than the high school. I think kids like to keep their stuff more to themselves when they're in high school, and that probably won't be as much of an issue. But like Greg mentioned, one-to-one devicing as much as possible will be implemented. And the end is certainly about the school cleaning and disinfecting. We have invested in technology, electrostatic sprayers that our facility staff are training on as we speak. Also, we will be enhancing our cleaning protocols for the high traffic areas and all of the classroom spaces on a daily basis, on a nightly basis, to make sure that they are disinfected properly. We are going to be using the benefits of having students being able to wipe down desks and other things that would be within their personal space throughout the day. So these are all types of things that we're working with the teachers on to make sure that we keep the building as safe and as clean as possible. The other things related to cleaning and disinfecting isn't just the wiping down and more the labor, but it's also making sure that our HVAC system is clean. So Mike has been very much on top of those units, making sure that they're working at top ability. And that's one thing that was pretty steady as part of the DESE guidelines to make sure we're doing on a regular basis. So all these things have been enhanced. We are exploring, hopefully, adding more staff, whether it be with our cleaning service, to make sure that we can meet the protocols that have been established. But these are all things that we're investigating and have not been finalized yet.
Are there any questions for Keith on that previous section? Okay, seeing none.
I'm sorry. Lunches in the lunchroom are, where will students be having lunch?
Sean, we'll get to food services in a little bit. Sean, is it okay?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
no.
I was thinking space and consideration, but sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely, no problem at all. And actually space is part of the transportation piece as well. So a few of the guidelines that are coming out, and this is a K-12 piece, is that all students that will be riding a bus will be required to wear a mask. We are also assigning seats to students so that as they board, as they load the bus, they will be moving all the way to the back and then loading from the back to the front with the assigned seats. And that will be all part of the routing that is done. Very fortunate to have Jean Pinto, our transportation coordinator, ready to work on that as soon as the model is decided. So we will be very busy in the next couple of weeks ensuring that we adjust. Also on the buses is that as the bus is in operation and we have students on it, the windows will be open. I think certain accommodations will be made as we get to the winter months and those windows will be cracked. But we do want to ensure that we get as much fresh air into the vehicles as possible, which is not different than the HVAC recommendations we're getting for the building. We are collaborating closely with NRT. I've had about 3 or 4 meetings with NRT so far, and we're continuing that. We are going to be increasing the cleaning of the vehicles. We would like a deep cleaning to occur after all AM runs and then after every PM run. And then as in between the tiers, so after they're finished at Algonquin and they're moving to the other buildings, that the high traffic areas are spot cleaned and taken care of at that time. One thing we implemented in the spring was bus registration, hoping that we would be back to a normal start for September, which is not going to occur. But we did implement this, and it's going to be a standing procedure that we want families to register to take the bus, which would then allow us to customize our routing accordingly. What we're going to do in the weeks to come, and it's going to be part of the communication that Superintendent Martineau sends out, is that families will be allowed to change their registration status from what they put down in the spring. And we'll give them an avenue to do that, which might be as simple as sending an email to myself or Jean, and we'll just make the changes accordingly. In fact, we've already had a couple come in based on our Wednesday night presentation. So that'll be something that we do. The key to that is we want to capture all the students that will definitely be taking the bus. And we know things change, but we want to make sure that we have as solid routing and as bus list as possible, so I can work closely with the schools to let them know who will be coming and then who we'll expect to be dropped off. And that will also allow some flexibility with the drop off and pickup procedures. And Sean and I, as an example, just talked about that for about a half hour and how the drop off and pickup will happen. And that is a fluid thing that no final decision has been made on. Before I move on to food services, are there any questions around transportation?
I had one question. I saw it, you're going to allow students from the same family to sit in the same seat. And won't that put at least one of those kids pretty close to other kids?
So the seating configurations is an interesting topic. In fact, I was on a conference call with the state a couple of days ago reviewing that exact question. And we didn't get definitive guidance. But the thinking is that instead of, because the images that they show, and it's going to be part of the manual and is definitely part of the DESE guidelines, is kind of a staggered approach. So students would either be sitting against the window or in an aisle to get the right spacing. The idea is that we hopefully will be able to keep students against the window as much as possible to keep the distance. And then the height of the seats in front of them would allow that to become an additional barrier. But that is something that's down the road that's coming. I do agree. I had the same question, Paul. You know, if we had 2 students to a seat, you know, what that would do. So what we're doing for that is we're not going to have that's going to be an option for a family, more for the student's well-being. But if we can keep it to 1 student per seat, that's going to be the goal of our capacities on the buses. So that won't be necessary to double up.
Can I just comment around going back to a previous section around school facilities and shared materials? So one of the areas where it's specific to the high school is science and microscopes and those types of things. So we are looking at making some additional purchases in those areas. And those are COVID-19 related expenses that can potentially be reimbursed. So we're looking at that.
Good point, Greg. Are there any other questions about transportation?
Can I add one other item around transportation that's tangentially connected, and that is around fees. So parking fees, Becky, I'm not sure if you want to talk about fees briefly, and what our thinking is and what our recommendation to the school committee will be around fees.
In looking at the fees for last year, we really looked at each individual, I guess, service that was being provided, and as to whether or not, like, for example, with student activities, whether the activities were continuing. We obviously did not collect for athletic fees because there was no spring season. So we are continuing to look at those. And then depending on the model, we'll be coming up with a recommendation to the school committee based on whether or not the activity, the parking is going to be needed or athletics will be in play. So we are evaluating all of those, but are not prepared to present anything at this time.
Thank you, Becky. Any
Uh,
questions? Any
any-
questions?
Okay, I'll move on to food services, and we'll be able to answer Sean right off the bat here. I think this is probably one of the areas that Sean has been the most time thinking about, because it is so integral to the schedule that we can follow, and it is all about the capacity and the distance we're able to achieve. So we were really waiting anxiously to get DESI's guidelines when it came to transportation and food services, which just came out last Thursday. But we were correct on a lot of the assumptions. So the first is that students will need to be at least 6 feet apart in order to meet the DESI guideline, and obviously will not be wearing masks at the time. This creates a unique situation at Algonquin. When we did the square footage and the assessment of that, at 6 feet of distance, we were only able to get really safely about 70. What was the number in the calf, Sean? Was it 75 in the calf?
No, it was 125, 130.
125. So that was also using some creative furniture configurations too. It wasn't just the regular cafeteria tables, because we couldn't allow students to face each other. So that's one of the variations that we have to consider. So because of that, we really had to expand and look at the other spaces in Algonquin. So we are going to have students in the cafeteria as well as part of the C gym, and as well as the C gym, but also a creative twist is using some of the lobby areas of the building, especially outside of the auditorium, where students will be able to have their lunch there. So this is part of the detail that Sean and his team have been getting into, and making sure that the lunch waves can meet those capacity levels. Which this does is it puts a very unique challenge in place for Diane Kofer, our food services manager, of how to get meals to each of those locations and how to serve them appropriately. So a lot of the work that's being done is streamlining our menus and optimizing our distribution techniques to make sure that we are individually wrapping things as much as possible. And we're even going so far as to label them with the student's name on it. It might be something that we did in kindergarten or elementary school, but it will be something that we might be able to utilize at the high school to make sure that we minimize contact as much as possible. So this afternoon, both of our food services managers are going through a webinar that is going to allow us to add some online ordering. We haven't decided yet on a vendor, but we are narrowing in on that. So the night before, a parent or a student could log in and place their order. This would help us tremendously with the payment situation, as well as the preparation of the meals. So it is a whole new way of thinking when it comes to food services, like we've all experienced in one way or another, and it won't be different for our cafeteria at Algonquin.
I will add also, Keith, that if we are fully in person with 100% of the kids in there, that would require a schedule adjustment to add a fourth lunch block. It wouldn't reduce the amount of time students have to eat. That time is important for them. But we would add a fourth lunch block, and we've figured out a 2-day schedule that allows for that. The schedule would be basically a Monday schedule, but with a fourth lunch block. I won't bore you with all those details. And then also, as we're looking to expand our cafeteria into other spaces, we found some solutions where some of that unused furniture that's coming out of classrooms, I think, will be useful in creating these new spaces. So we've found some like symbiotic solutions that help us in one area and deliver benefits in others. And that's the kind of thinking that my team and I are trying to achieve as we're just innovating around all these challenges.
And that is a typical model for all 10 of the schools, actually. You know, Sean and the other principals have been sharing that, and that is what's being done with a level of frequency. The other thing that I comment is that it, you know, the fourth lunch wave either makes for a brunch or an early dinner. So we'll figure out how that can work out if the time comes. But as of now, we seem pretty prepared to provide the distancing that is required and the methods for distribution that are required to do it safely. So I'm feeling pretty confident. Diana is an incredible worker, and I think she has the best interest of the kids in mind. She did an awesome job this spring in preparing meals for many of our families, and it is a continuation of that work that will occur. So that leads me to the last one, is that if, and we are working our way through the details of this, but if students are able and qualify, we will be providing meals for them. Let's say if we're in a remote situation and they're in person on Tuesday, at the end of that day, they will be able to pick up a meal that will be for Wednesday when they are remote. So these are the types of things we're preparing as we move forward.
Keith, I have one question. Would we have to have an extra expense due to the COVID? And would that be almost like, instead of the trays or the cardboard trays, would we now have to go into something such as a plastic, like a takeout container that you would use that maybe, would that expense be attributed to COVID-19 and come under some of the acts?
Becky and I have been collaborating on that. I would say, and Becky, do you know the answer to that specifically, or do I have to get back to Joan on that?
I think we should get back to Joan on that.
I certainly hope so, Joan, because it would be nice if that type of thing could be reimbursed, but I don't want to say definitively.
Yeah.
My hope is that it would, but I can't confirm that 100%.
Yeah.
Are you thinking?
I would like to, sorry, Joan.
Thinking of doing a takeout box?
Right. That's what we're planning on doing, or something that is wrapped securely with Saran wrap, or any type of fastener to make sure that it stays enclosed.
Okay, Kathleen Holland.
Yes, thank you, Joan. I would like to encourage the most environmentally sound choices to be made in this direction. This was a trajectory that Algonquin was on. There was a great deal of student input on that specifically, and I'd very much like to be a stand for it.
We are absolutely looking at recycled items in order to achieve the individually wrapped portions. We also are looking at supply chains as well, as being available. So we are researching a lot of different options when it comes to that. But yes, we will look for the most green methods possible.
I greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome, Kathleen.
Are there any other questions for Keith for the food services? Okay, seeing none.
So the other section really, which is pertinent just to the high school for the most part, in our middle schools, is extracurricular activities and athletics. And Sean, if you want to speak to some of our thinking around that at this time.
I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Yeah, the athletics and extracurriculars are really so important for the high school. For a lot of kids, it's a real attraction to school. And so we're committed to trying to the maximum degree possible, maintaining those things. And so I've been meeting frequently with Mike Mascherino to talk through what return to play scenarios might be for our athletes. Currently, we're not allowed to start any athletics until at the earliest September 14th, and that date is subject to change based on what our model is and what the state tells us. So currently, we're planning as a best case scenario to return on September 14th. If that doesn't happen, and we have to really rethink how the fall sports season looks and whether or not we can have proper full-blown athletics where our kids are going and competing in other schools, which is what we're hopeful for. He's building some other scenarios that might be helpful to maintain an athletics program of some sort. So that might be something as innovative and still highly competitive as keeping varsity level athletics going, but maybe running some less kind of less competitive athletics at the lower levels the sub-varsity teams, or even if we really had to go away from traveling to other places, doing something in-house where students have an athletics experience, with each other at the end of the school day, if we can do that safely. So Mike is trying to balance, Mr. Masserino is trying to balance the needs for safety with our very high eagerness to have an athletics program. Same, I would say, Greg, with our other programs. They're not all athletics, of course. So we have arts programs, we have special interest clubs. So if we're in person, we're going to still find ways to support those. And if we can have academics happen in the school day and do it socially distantly, I don't imagine we wouldn't be able to have our special interest clubs meet as well. So I think the degree to which we can, the model that we are in for school will dictate the models we employ for special interest clubs and activities. And then I think the same is going to be true to some degree for athletics, but our commitment to keeping both is very high.
So just to follow up too with Paul Butka's earlier question around athletics, and if it's a hybrid model, how will we, an athletic program is running, or a music program is running, or a fine arts program, how will we get to students to those programs on days where they're remote? And I'll just generally answer that we are waiting from additional guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, but we're also working very closely with our transportation provider, NRT, to have a plan B, again, to get those students to school potentially for extracurricular activities, regardless of whether it's athletics, music, fine arts.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So the last section really is what are our next steps. So obviously we shared with the committee and the community a tremendous amount of information. The goal is to continue working on this draft plan and make sure we're fine-tuning it as we're getting additional feedback. I will be sharing this draft plan out to the Algonquin community later today with an opportunity to submit questions around more specific details. And we'll be holding community forums on Monday, and I'll be communicating that out to the community in my Friday's communication. Although there will be 3 forums. The first forum will have a focus of elementary, the second forum will have a focus of high school, and the third forum will have a focus of middle school, but parents will be able to interact with any of the forums. And our goal is to answer all the questions that are submitted to us. The next Wednesday, or actually this Wednesday, August 5th, there is a combined school committee meeting. And really, that combined meeting is for the school committee to make a decision around whether they're going to approve the district reopening plan. They're not supporting necessarily a remodeling position or an opening position in terms of the model, but rather approving the entire plan, and depending on what will happen, we would move in and out of models. That's a different vote at a different meeting. And then the week of 8/10 through 8/14, our goal really is around providing families an opportunity to select into the opt-in standalone remote and allow us to get some numbers and really think about staffing in order to create that standalone community. And we are confident that we are going to be able to do that based on some of our preliminary conversations. So that is the current timeline. There's a lot of other steps that we are taking internally, but in regards to the next couple of weeks, what parents can expect, this is a general overview, and more specifics will be shared in the weekly communication later today. And at this time, this is concludes our reopening plan presentation, and would happy to answer any other questions around this topic.
Greg Superintendent, I would just like to thank you and your entire administrative staff for doing such a comprehensive reopening plan and looking at the 4 different models and all the different other subsets within it, looking at transportation, looking at special ed, looking at the food services, and also for the high school, looking at, because it's a different model that we look at than we do to K to 8. So I'd like to applaud all of you for the hard work that you've put into this. I think it's an excellent plan and something that, you know, we will be discussing, as you said, at the combined meeting and taking a vote on. But I think it is very comprehensive, and you looked at all angles of this and all the different variables that we could be facing as we go into the fall season with the pandemic of COVID-19. Are there any other comments or questions from school committee members?
So I have one, Joan, if I could.
Sure, Paul Desmond. Paul Bucka.
So Greg, yeah, thanks to you and your team. That was terrific. So just for clarity for me, so when exactly are we targeting finalizing the approach to how school starts?
So my thinking and is that next August 5th we'll have a combined school committee, and I'm going to do a presentation around a brief presentation, not like today. And I would like the school committees, because it's a combined meeting, to approve the district reopening plan. And again, that's not selecting a model, that's just approving the plan. I'm proposing another meeting the 12th of August, and we'll make a recommendation to the school committees around what model makes the most sense for the district. And it might be a different model for Southborough, Northborough, and the region, but we need to take a position in terms of what is the best reopening model, and a vote from the committee using the most recent data, health metrics at that time. I do have to submit a plan to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education by August 10th. So as long as I have the voted plan by August 5th, I'll be able to meet that requirement.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we will go on to, again, thank you so much to the entire administrative team. Now we're going on to the next agenda item, which is the subcommittee assignments for 2020-2021 school year.
I know she had to go. She might be in the audience, but I'm not sure she can speak. But in any event, she is waiting on me. I'm the worst offender. And she also needs to hear from Dan Kalenda, who is not on the call, and also Kathleen Howland, who is on the call. So Kathleen, take a look at those subcommittee assignments and let Kathy know. And as always, given the flexible nature of what is going on, if you've already let Kathy know, but for some reason there's changes, let her know as well. And then she'll get them out.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from any board members about any of those subcommittees? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to the next part, which is audience sharing. The only one that I have received, as you notice on the thing, is that I can receive, as all chairs have in the past, is through the RSC website. And the only one that I received was from a Stephanie Stockman on July 29th. And she lives at 37 Summer Street in Northborough. And looking over her 2 questions, they have been answered in the presentation. She had a question about, have extracurricular activities been discussed as part of the reopening of schools? And I think that has been addressed. And has there been any discussion as to how students will be placed into a cohort for the hybrid model? And I think that was also discussed. So that was the only audience sharing that I had.
Joan, we through the Q&A application in Zoom, we received 27 questions, 26 questions approximately. We've answered 17 of those through our conversations and presentation. There remain 9 open questions, and we will endeavor to get answers back to those folks who asked those questions shortly.
Okay, and Greg, do you want to just highlight what came out of the joint meeting of the K-8 School Committee and what we're doing with those questions and how we're going to be categorizing them according to the reopening plan, and then how you plan to disseminate that to the community members and school committee?
So as part of our communication plan, we're developing a user-friendly website that will have an FAQ section. So we're taking all the questions that have been asked and creating an FAQ. So for categorizing and answering those questions, again, that will be a resource to families because I'm sure many families have very similar questions. So the Northborough and Southborough committees have had, I think, over 100+ questions on their forum, on their meeting on Wednesday night. I'm losing what day it is, but Wednesday night, they had 100 questions, and they're categorizing that. Those will become part of the FAQ as well.
And I see the total of audience members minus the administration and staff that we have, but we have a total of 52 participants that have been in the audience. So I'd like to thank them for staying with us and for listening to us in this wonderful presentation. The only other audience sharing I have is that there was a 4-page handout sent to us from MASC on a guide to member roles and reopening of schools. And Greg, on the 3rd page, they had what policies need to be reviewed. Do you think that we need to have a policy subcommittee to look at any policies before we reopen schools?
Yeah, my recommendation is that all 3 of the school committees, Northborough, Southborough, pre-K through 8, and the region have a combined policy subcommittee meeting to look at some of the policies that we should put into place. So I will work with Cheryl Lepre to get that scheduled. And again, as time is not on our side in terms of all of this work, so probably be sooner than later.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other administration or school committee members that would like to share? Okay, seeing none.
So can I just share?
Sure.
I guess I just want to reiterate that our #1 priority is the health and safety of students, faculty, staff, and families, and that is one of our main guiding principles. So I don't want to lose sight of that. We understand that faculty and staff and families are concerned. A pandemic is concerning. And lastly, I just would like to share that we are just the tremendous amount of work that is taking place from building principals and district leaders trying to get this right and be thoughtful and get parents information in a timely manner in the best interest of students and their learning. So I just want to thank the district leadership team and principals and the high school leadership team for their leadership thus far. It's been a tremendous undertaking.
It is, and I'd like to echo the same sentiments and second that. I think it's wonderful what everybody has been doing. Okay, so at the time, it being 12:29, I would like to entertain a motion to.
I would move that we adjourn this session of the Northborough Southborough Regional School Committee.
Is there a second? Second first by Paul Becca and second by Paul Desmond. This is a roll call vote. Karen Ayers.
Yes.
Paul Becca.
Yes.
Chris Covino.
Yes.
Paul Desmond.
Yes.
Kathleen Howland.
Yes.
Kathy Key is gone. Okay.
I don't think she can, I don't think she can talk, but she's there. So I'll say yes for her.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Shauna Shea.
Yes.
I hear. Kathleen Palachko.
Yes.
And myself, Joan Frank. Yes. So we are adjourned at 12:30. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.